You clicked on this video because for one reason or another, you want to learn Python. So I'm here to help you get the language working on your own computer and to show you around. The first step is to install a program called PyCharm. Now, Python is a text-based language. You could theoretically open Notepad, type some Python code, and get it to work somehow. But doing that requires you knowing your way around the command line, and I'm not going to assume that in this tutorial. We're going to take the easier route instead by installing PyCharm. To get it, go to jetbrains.com/PyCharm and press the black download button. Here it is. We are going to be downloading the Community Edition, which is the free version. There is also PyCharm Professional, if you feel like spending money for a better tool, but when first learning, the community version is more than adequate. So let's download it. Alright, now that it's downloaded, run the executable, and we're just going to hit next here. It's going to ask you where to install it. I'm actually going to change it because on my computer I am a bit strained for space. So give me a moment. And it's going to ask you if you want a desktop shortcut. Go ahead and check this box if you want that. The rest of this we're just going to leave alone. And just hit install. Alright, now that it's installed, check the box that says Run PyCharm Community Edition and hit finish. And go ahead and accept the license agreement. You know the drill, you've installed programs before. And you'll be greeted with this window. Let's also install Python itself. Go to python.org and click the Downloads button at the top. Then press the large yellow download button. For me, it says Download Python 3.9.1. It also might look different if you're on macOS or Linux. On macOS, installation will be similar to Windows. On Linux, you'll probably prefer to install Python through your package manager, and I'm going to assume that you know how to do that. And in order to install Python, it's very easy. All we need to do is click Install Now and hit Yes here. And just let it go. And just close it. It's all done. Now, back to PyCharm and press the large New Project button. We get to name the project now. I'm going to call it Python Tutorial. Just like that. There's also a field down here that says Base Interpreter. Make sure that it's configured to the one in the folder that says Python 3.9, like this, or whichever is the latest version when you're installing this, because it might be different than today. Other than that, there's also this checkbox here that says Create a main.py welcome script. We're going to skip this part because I have a different plan. Just hit Create. And PyCharm will do its thing. There's also a tip of the day here. If you'd like, you can click Next Tip and keep scrolling through these and check out some cool features of PyCharm. If you don't care about that, just check the Don't Show Tips box and hit Close. You can always access them from the settings. We are going to start by writing a traditional program that all beginning and expert programmers write as their first program in a new programming language. This program is called Hello World. It prints some text to the console, typically the words Hello World, and then exits. The value of this program is that it verifies that we have everything working the way that it should, so that we can move on to more complex code. This is going to be an exercise in repeat after me, so don't worry too much about understanding this code yet. I'm going to dissect it in a minute. First, create a new Python file by right-clicking on the project name over on the left, selecting New, and selecting Python file. We get to name it whatever we want. I'll call it hello world.py. The .py file extension just identifies the file as a Python file. Since Python is a text-based language, it could run a file with any file extension, but using .py is the convention. Inside the new file, type what I type. Print, parentheses, quotes, hello, world. Closing quote, closing parenthesis. Just like that. The computer can run our code now. Right-click on the file name over on the left-hand side, and click the Run menu option, this one. You can see in the window that just popped up some gobbledygook about files, then hello world, and then process finished with exit code 0. That first part is irrelevant to us right now, and the last part means that the program ran successfully. So let's go over this. What did we just do? We created a Python file with a .py file extension and wrote some code in it. What Python does is opens our file, reads the code, and does whatever it says. We'll get more specific as the tutorial goes on. The code we wrote is actually using something called a function. That function is called print. Functions in Python are similar to what you know from math, but there's an important difference. Python functions can do many things and return a value of some type, whereas math functions can only do one thing and return a number in all cases. Let's go over data types in Python. For this, I'm going to open Python in what is called interactive mode, where I can type expressions and Python tells me the result of the said expressions. So, in order to do that, I'm going to open the Start menu, type Python, and press Enter. Here's Python. I'm going to zoom in a bit so y'all can see it. First up, we have text, or strings as Python calls them. Strings are created using double quotes or single quotes. They are interchangeable as far as Python is concerned. They can have anything inside those quotes except for obviously another quote, because that would end the string. We'll go over how to get the actual quote symbol inside the string later. So here's an example of a string, hello. And you can see that Python spits back to us hello, but with single quotes, because again, they're interchangeable. Next are numbers. There are actually two types of number. Integers, which are just like mathematical integers, so 1 is an integer, 10 is an integer, this number is an integer, and floating point numbers, which represent real numbers. Integers are easy to represent, just type them out like I'm doing here. Floating point numbers can also be typed out using a decimal point, but if there's no decimal point, then Python is going to assume that it's an integer, because there's no way for it to tell the difference. So here's a floating point number, 1.0, 1.10, which is equal to 1.1, as Python cleverly points out, 3.14159, that's pi, kinda, and so on. You can type a whole bunch of floating point numbers, and Python is going to always send back a number that is approximately the same. We'll go over why it's approximate and not exact later. Up next are booleans. Booleans are a kind of data that are useful in comparing and testing values. For example, let's ask Python if 1 is equal to 1. So we'll type 1 and then 2 equal signs and then 1. You can see that Python responds with true. It's telling us that the expression is true. In other words, 1 is equal to 1. Let's try asking if 1 is equal to 2. Python tells us false, that is, 1 is not equal to 2. We can also ask the opposite question, is 1 not equal to 2? And in order to do that, we will type 1 and then an exclamation mark and an equal sign, exactly like that, and then 2. And you can see that Python tells us true in that case. Boolean values are useful for many things, as we'll see later. And you can always interpret true as yes and false as no. Finally, there is the none type. It represents the absence of anything. If we type none into the interactive Python prompt, it gives no output whatsoever. So if Python doesn't give any output for a particular expression, that means the expression had a value of none. Now let's cover something called variables. Variables are names associated with values. So we'll go back to PyCharm for this. And I'm going to increase the font size so that y'all can read it. Python can look up a variable by name and get its value. So in order to create a variable, we say its name, which in this case, I'm going to just call it my underscore variable, like this. And then an equal sign, one equal sign, not two. And then we give it a value. I'm going to give it the value true. You can see that PyCharm highlights true orange, which tells us that Python knows about true. Next up, we can do print my underscore variable. And you can see that PyCharm is showing it in a list down here. So it knows about it. And you can also see that whenever we put the cursor onto either of the instances of my variable, Python will highlight it in green and orange here. Orange means the variable is being assigned to, and green means the variable is being used. So if we run this program, Python will print true, which is the exact value of my variable. Variables represent the state of our program as it's being run. Now that we have such a representation, it's very important to understand a bit more of how the computer runs our code. The computer opens our file, reads it one line at a time. So first it reads this line, and then it reads this line, from top to bottom, usually, and then does what the code says in that exact order. What that means is, if we were to rearrange our code to have the lines in the opposite order, we'll have made an error. So let's do that, just for demonstration purposes. You can see, first of all, that PyCharm highlights it with a red underline. That tells us that PyCharm knows that this is not valid. Python prints something in red whenever we make a mistake like this. Keep in mind that this is PyCharm and not Python that has this red underline. If we run it, we will see this error in red. This is Python's error. And it says name my variable is not defined. But we did define it. It's right there, one line below. Python prints something in red whenever we make a mistake like this, or any other mistake. Mistakes in programming are called bugs, and to fix them is to debug the program. Python is usually only able to tell us that a bug exists, not where, so PyCharm gives us a helpful tool called the debugger. Let's debug our file. We're going to press the debug icon, or the bug icon, on the top right corner of the window, this one. And it's going to ask us if we can allow it through the firewall, and we're going to go ahead and say allow. And you can see that it has stopped here on the first line. And there's a little lightning bolt here, which means that an error happened. PyCharm lets us see the variables that the computer knows about at this point. There's this thing, which we don't have to care about, and there's all of these, which are special variables and also don't have to care about them right now. But notice how my variable is not listed here. And that's our bug. The variable hello is not visible yet. Armed with this knowledge, we can fix the bug by swapping the lines back to where they were. Just like that. And now the program works again. That about wraps it up for this first episode. Python may not seem very useful yet, but I haven't covered even 1% of what the language has to offer. Keep in mind that I'm going at a slower pace to allow everyone to keep up. In the next episode, we'll cover collections of data, as well as getting user inputs and loops. With that, we'll be able to create an interactive program, our very first. See you then.